What's up, everybody? Cody Bidlow with sprintingworkouts.com and ATHLETE.X. Back at the track again. Yesterday I posted that video about doing the 40s and then going over the race that I did this past weekend. Now, I did go to the gym after that workout yesterday, and then I came back out today to sprint. Now, in the past, I've avoided doing back-to-back sprint days because I felt like, at previous points in time, I couldn't quite recover enough after one day of sprinting to be able to come back the next day and sprint fast again. But I'm making some adjustments now because, as you go through training over time, in general, you want to work toward having an overall higher volume of training at the specific intensities you're trying to develop. But if you just slam that all into one session, there's a couple issues. One, you can only maintain really high quality efforts for so many sprints before your quality starts to drop and either your technique will start to fail or you won't have enough energy and neural drive to keep sprinting at a high level, and so you'll end up slowing down throughout the workout. And then if you think about, stress, I don't believe that stress, as far as, if we're talking about high intensity sprinting, I don't think that the stress per rep grows in a linear fashion. I think there's more of a, what would it be called, a parabolic growth, where, or maybe that's exponential, I don't know, I'm not a math whiz, but anyways, I don't believe that it's linear, where, each rep that you add, if it's at 95, 98, 100% effort, that each rep adds 1 unit of stress. I think maybe when you do, 2 reps, each of those might be, around 1 unit of stress, just as an arbitrary number. But then as you add a third one, it might be 1.2 or 1.5, and then you add a fourth one, that might go to 1.7 or 2 stress units. Just, these are just arbitrary numbers, but to illustrate the concept that as you continue adding high intensity volume in a session, I don't believe that the stress increase throughout the session is linear, that it's 1-to-1. I think the deeper you go into a workout and the more sprints you do at a high velocity or high intensity, they become relatively more stressful because your energy reserves and your whole system can only handle so much. So if you then, overfill the cup, so to speak, and it overflows, it's going to be harder to recover from that compared to if you were to split that session up into multiple sessions. So what I'm doing right now and what I'm experimenting with is a little bit higher frequency or a little bit higher density of sprinting. So like, for example, sprinting back-to-back days. But each day is fairly limited on the overall volume. So yesterday I did 200 meters of sprinting, or really it was 200 yards, but we'll just call it 200 meters. Then I went and I did a light lift where I did back squats, only 155 pounds, sets of 2, and then I went into things like, single leg cycle jumps for 2 jumps or standing triple jump, things like that. So I'm working on single leg contacts in a horizontal direction, jumping, paired with light explosive squats where I'm dropping as fast as I can and trying to reverse out of the bottom as fast as I can. So if you think of that overall session that I did yesterday, the 5x40 yards on the turf, and then I went and did that lift and those jumps, that's a pretty good dose of stress, but it's not overkill. And then today when I woke up, I felt pretty good. I recently bought an Omega Wave, which I'll talk about later, but it basically measures some things related to your cardiac system and your nervous system. And it'll tell you, some objective measures of where your body's at. And after looking at that and based on how I felt, I thought, I'm in good shape to run today. So I came back out and sprinted again. And today's session was 220 meters of total volume. I did 4x10 meters out of blocks, 2x20 meters out of blocks, and 2x70 meters out of blocks. Now I set some PRs from 30 to 50 meters and from 30 to 70 meters. I also believe I set a PR from 10 to 60, but I haven't tested that distance or that split time very often, so I don't believe it's actually a PR, but it's the fastest I've ever actually measured. Because, some days you don't measure certain distances, so you might actually PR and not notice it, but it doesn't really matter. This is just for general tracking purposes. Anyways, the point is, now I've had 420 meters of sprinting split over 2 sessions in 2 days. So I've gotten a good amount of sprinting volume in. All of those sprints were at a pretty high quality. I didn't slow down Well, I didn't slow down at all today. I finished on my fastest rep and shut it down after that. Yesterday, I slowed down just slightly on the last rep. So the amount of fatigue or the amount of sprinting under fatigue that I'm doing is not very significant, because if you finish your workout on your fastest sprint, you don't ever feel like sluggish or like you're really getting beat down, but you're still getting exposure to those high quality sprints. So now I've had 420 meters of sprinting in 2 days. But if I had done 420 meters of sprinting yesterday, I would be completely trashed today. I would have no energy. My brain would be flat. I wouldn't be recording this video. I definitely wouldn't be sprinting today. And so, this is one of the ways that we can get creative with our training is as long as you don't do too much on one day, you might be able to come out the next day and do something again when, had you done more in that initial day, you would have had to wait 1 or 2 days before you could come back and sprint. The other thing that I noticed with the Omega Wave is that I tend to show my best state of readiness as far as heart rate variability, DC potential, which is a measurement of your nervous system activation. I've noticed that in the short time that I've been using it, I tend to have better readiness the day after a low volume sprint session than the day of that low volume sprint session. So for example, yesterday, it showed that my readiness was not that great, and I didn't feel very good when I came out. I felt I didn't want to warm up. I didn't want to do anything. I just sort of, did as short of a warm up as I could to get into the session and get it going. Whereas today, I felt a lot better as far as just feeling ready to go, motivated to train and all that. So you might even end up in a situation where you perform better on your second day of sprinting because your system is more ready to go. There's some people who they need to be really calm, really relaxed for them to run as fast as possible. And so for them, it's better to have, more days off or more low intensity days leading up to a fast day. But for me, I'm starting to notice that I tend to run better when I've had a stimulating day prior. So that's where that idea of, a potentiation day comes into play. But it's different now compared to, say, 4 years ago. 4 years ago, before I had a big gap in competition, I couldn't do back-to-back days of sprinting even if it was pretty low volume like today. I would have issues with my adductors bothering me or my hamstrings or, something would always be kind of mad. And so I couldn't do back-to-back days unless I went super low volume to the point where it would be questionable that the session is even doing anything, because if the volume is too low, it might not be a stimulating load or even a maintenance load. And so then you have to question, is it even worth doing a workout if you're only going to do one sprint? Are you going to get anything out of it? You might. Maybe that's great for a potentiation day. But anyways, back then, I couldn't do back-to-back sessions. But now, because I've, continued to train, continued to develop my body, and I've gotten to a point where my body can handle certain types of sprinting fairly well as long as the volume isn't that high, now I'm in a situation where I might need that potentiation day prior to competition. And in my last video where I talked about that meet that I ran at, I didn't do anything the day before other than a couple warm-up skips and things like that, really, really, really basic. I didn't even jog. I just did some skips, and that was it. So, maybe I would have run better had I had a potentiation day. I don't know. I was trying to focus on getting my ankle right, so I didn't want to mess with that. But going forward, I think this might be something that I mess around with, because if I can come out here after doing 200 meters of sprinting yesterday, plus lifting and jumping, low load, but still, I still did it. If I can do that today and set PRs at certain flying sprint distances, then maybe if I do less, 100 to 150 meters of sprinting without the lifting before a meet or before another day where I want to sprint fast, maybe that's where I'm going to be in my best, overall state of readiness. So you got to find what works for you. And you don't have to have fancy equipment. You don't have to have fancy measurement devices. You don't need a smartwatch or anything like that to tell you when you're ready or not. You can just sort of track, okay, today I'm going to go out and I'm going to do, 150 meters of sprinting. Maybe that's 5 by 30. And then you wake up the next day, see how you feel. First, check, make sure your tissues are all good. Do you have any issues with any strains or any tendons that are bothering you because you don't want to pull something or risk a soft tissue injury? But if you feel good from a body perspective, you don't have any tight spots or anything that's really bothering you, you could then experiment and do a similar volume load sprint session the next day. So you did your 5x30 on Monday, then maybe you come out Tuesday and you try some flying sprints, or you try some speed endurance or something like that, and see how it goes. See, do you feel more motivated that second day or less motivated? If you're less motivated, that's a sign that maybe you need more of a low day before you sprint. But if you're more motivated on that second day, that's a sign that your system is more revved up and ready to go. And as long as you don't go overboard on the volume, you'll be good to do that sprint session. Like I said, you need to make sure your body's in good shape. You don't have any aches and pains, tight spots, or anything like that. But barring that, assuming that you're physically feeling good, your tissues are okay, if you're more motivated that second day, that's really useful information that you can then use to structure your program in a way that might be more useful to you. Because if over the course of time we need to find ways to change the stimulus, like I said, in the form of footwear, wearable resistance, sleds, different things that you can modify the loading. Another way to modify the loading is density and frequency. So if you're trying to hone a skill, you're probably better off doing that skill more often if you want to really hone it in a really high quality way. We have to balance that with how much overall volume load you're dealing with, whether or not your body can handle that. So we have to be smart. We can't just, mindlessly go out, run 500 meters of sprinting one day, 600 meters the next day, and assume that we're going to be okay and be able to recover. That's probably going to be overboard. But if you tone the volume down, you keep the quality high, you might be able to get in some back-to-back days. And then over the course of time, you might look at a week, and whereas before you might have sprinted twice in 1 week, maybe you can sprint 3 or 4 times in 1 week with the same amount of volume, but you're getting a more frequent stimulus, and that's a stimulus and a load that your body can recover from. And you might end up better off than if you had done really large sessions like you might do more in your off season, where you're working on capacity and trying to build your ability to train. Yeah, when you're building your ability to train, you might want to do a little bit more volume load per session. But when you're training to perform well, you're training to compete well and execute high quality skills, high intensity skills in competition or in your practices, that's where the benefit of these lower volume sessions that are maybe not as spread out could be of use to you. So consider trying that in your program. See if modifying these factors of a little less volume per day but training more frequently, see if that helps you. That might be something that could make a big change in your training and your performance, because then you're playing with optimizing your state of readiness, making sure that your body is stimulated when it's time to run fast, making sure that the sessions that you're doing are a load that your body can recover from, rather than risking doing too much in any one session. And if we can, stimulate but not annihilate the body, that's where we're going to get our best results, in my opinion. And that's also where I came up with the idea of using lighter squats at this point in time, because I noticed that a few weeks ago I squatted 345. I just did a single. Probably could have done a double and probably could have done more weight, but I just felt, I'm just going to do a single because I hadn't been doing a lot of squatting. And I noticed that I felt really sluggish for a while after that. Now, there were other factors at play, other types of training going on that, were probably too much load in a short period of time. But when I do these squats at a light load, where I'm moving the bar as fast as I can, I'm dropping as fast as I possibly can, and then reversing it out of the bottom as fast as I can, I feel like it wakes me up, and I'm still I'm still expressing force, expressing power, but it's at a load that is not going to, make me feel crushed the next day. If anything, I'm going to feel better after doing that workout. Another thing I noticed when I lifted was last week I did the same kind of workout where I went light squats and then some single leg jumping activities. I did 135 then. This week I did 155, but I moved the bar at the same or faster speed, which tells me that I was producing more force at a relatively high velocity, and to me, that's relevant to sprinting. So if you're in a competitive phase and you want to maintain strength, one thing to consider is you don't need super high loads to maintain strength, and you don't need, to lift 8 times a week to do that. You could lift once or twice a week. You can do moderate or light loads as long as you're moving the bar with a high level of intent. And I think you can maintain strength pretty well. And if anything, you might see that you start improving your strength at those higher velocity points along the force velocity curve. Now, whether you want to surf the curve or not, whether you think that's relevant, that's up to you. But I think we might sometimes assume incorrectly that we need a high load on the bar to maintain our strength, when if we move a lighter bar with a really high level of intent, we can still maintain strength while not having the negative effects that happen or that occur as a result of doing really heavy, slow lifting that might take away from our ability to do other more important training. Since lifting is a completely general stimulus, no matter what lift you do, we don't want it to take away from our sprinting. So how can we still lift, still maintain our strength outputs, still, work on that stuff without taking away from our ability to sprint? Well, you can do what I did. Light load, move the bar fast, don't do a whole lot of reps, just stimulate the body. Once you see the velocity drop, cut the exercise or cut the workout and wait for another day to train. So I think both of these concepts of lower volume sessions more frequently throughout time, as well as, with your lifts going a little bit lighter load, but moving the bar fast and not going for a super high volume, I think both of those concepts work well together, especially during a time where we're trying to compete or we're trying to, perform really well in practice. That's something to consider. Now, obviously, if it was the off season, things would be different, but it's not the off season. So right now we got to focus on optimizing everything for performance. And how do we do that? By making sure, yes, that we're in a good state of preparedness, but ultimately we need to be in a good state of readiness. We need to not be tired. We need to be revved up and ready to go. So play around with that. Consider how you might be able to modify your volume so that way you can have the same volume load throughout a week, but maybe you sprint a little bit more frequently. Each session is a little bit lower volume load. The total weekly volume load can be around the same, and see if that benefits you. If it doesn't, throw it out, go back to your old way of training. But you might find that you feel better each day. You don't feel as beat down by training because you're not doing these massive sessions that take everything out of you, that completely fry you for 3 days. And if I'm right in that the stress of training does not increase linearly as you add reps to a session, that it kind of gets more and more stressful the more that you add, this might be something to try. So consider that. Hopefully this gives you some ideas, but I'm going to go figure out what I'm going to do for the rest of the day and then get this video posted. I don't know if I'll post it today or tomorrow or a few days later, whatever, but eventually you'll see it. And once you see it, thanks for watching. So that's all for now, guys. This is Cody Bidlow with sprintingworkouts.com and ATHLETE.X signing off.